discussing about the development of diaphragm. What is diaphragm and where we can see the diaphragm in our body? In this class we are discussing about the thoraco-abdominal diaphragm. Okay. Now imagine this is your thoracic cavity and here we have the abdominal cavity. Between the thoracic cavity and abdominal cavity we have diaphragm. Okay. This is the diaphragm. How the adult diaphragm look? What is the shape of the adult diaphragm and what are the structures we can see in the adult diaphragm? What is the shape of the adult diaphragm? Dome shaped. Okay. What are the structures we can see in it? Okay. Now imagine this is your diaphragm, okay, and this is the anterior aspect, this is the posterior aspect. On the anterior aspect of your diaphragm we have sternum, on the posterior aspect we have vertebrae. Now I will turn the diaphragm like this. So your anterior aspect will go to the upward direction and the posterior aspect will come to the downward direction. So on the anterior aspect or in the upper part we have sternum. This is sternum. Okay. And in the downward direction we have vertebrae. What are the other structures we see in the diaphragm? What are the other important structures we see in the diaphragm? What is this structure called? Central? 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 Tendon. Okay. Central tendon. What are the other structures we see? This is your IVC, inferior vena cava. This is the esophagus and this is the aorta. Okay, these are the few important structures we see in the adult diaphragm. On the anterior aspect we have sternum, on the posterior aspect we have vertebrae. Inside the diaphragm we have central tendon, inferior vena cava, esophagus and aorta, and this is the muscle part. What about these two structures? This one. This is the right crura of diaphragm and this is the left crura of diaphragm. Together this will form the crus of diaphragm. Okay. What is the significance of crus of diaphragm? What is the importance of the crus of diaphragm? What is the importance of crus of the diaphragm? take it as an assignment question, find out what is the significance or importance of the crus of diaphragm. Okay. So, these are the adult structures we see inside the diaphragm. So, what is the source for these? What is the source of development of this diaphragm? There are 4 important sources, and all these 4 sources are derivatives of your mesoderm. So, your diaphragm is mesodermal in origin. Okay. So, what are the 4 important structures or source of your diaphragm? The first one is septum transversum. Second one is dorsal mesentery of, stop talking, esophagus. The first important source is septum transversum, then we have dorsal mesentery of esophagus, followed by mesoderm of which one? Lateral wall. What is the fourth source? What is the fourth source? It is pleuroperitoneal membrane or fold. These are the 4 important sources for the development of your diaphragm, and all these 4 important sources are derivatives of your mesoderm. Therefore, diaphragm is also mesodermal in origin. Any doubts? Any doubts in this? Okay. During the development, this is how your diaphragm will look. This is vertebrae and this is sternum. Below the sternum we can see septum transversum. Okay. And below the septum transversum we have esophagus. This esophagus is connected to your sternum and also to your vertebrae by a mesentery. Okay, like this. This is called dorsal mesentery of esophagus, and this is called ventral mesentery of esophagus. Is it clear? In the developing diaphragm, we have sternum and vertebrae. Next to sternum or below the sternum, we have septum transversum. Below that, we can see the presence of esophagus. This esophagus is connected to both your vertebrae and your sternum by ventral mesentery and dorsal mesentery of the esophagus. Okay. On either side of this, we have pleuroperitoneal canal. This is the pleuroperitoneal canal. Okay. Your development of diaphragm start from 4th week to 6th week, extends up to the 6th week. Okay. During the development process, this part of the pleuroparietal canal, that means a canal between your thoracic region and parietal region has to be closed. Okay. Further, another layer or another membrane is formed in this region here. In this region. Now this membrane will push your pleuroperitoneal canal towards the septum transversum and also your mesentery part towards the septum transversum. Okay. At this point we call it as a pleuroparietal fold. So what is happening in the development process? The development of diaphragm starts from the 4th week and it ends by the 6th week. Okay. For the development of diaphragm, we have 4 important sources. I have noted down all the 4 important sources. First, we can see the presence of septum transversum. Below the septum transversum, we have the esophagus. Your esophagus is connected to your vertebrae and to your sternum by a mesentery, that is called ventral mesentery and dorsal mesentery respectively. On either side of the esophagus, we can see the presence of pleuroperitoneal canal. This is a canal that present between your thoracic region and your peritoneal region, and that canal should be closed. Okay. For that process, we can see another one membrane developing inside your canal region. At this point, we call it as a pleuroperitoneal fold. It start moving towards your septum transversum and your mesentery part will also start moving towards your septum transversum. Okay, is it clear? Any doubts in this? Once the movement happens, this is how your diaphragm will start moving. Okay. Now this is the septum transversum, which is later going to develop as your central tendon. Okay. And next, this whole part is your pleuroperitoneal membrane now. Then we have esophagus as usual, and another one part is mesoderm of lateral body wall. This is your body wall. Okay, this is the lateral body wall. Now the body wall will start moving towards the inner aspect. So it forms the muscular portion of your or muscular part of your diaphragm. This is how the development of your diaphragm takes place. Any doubts? Any doubts in this? Okay. Introduction. The diaphragm is a dome-shaped musculotendinous partition that separates your thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity. The pericardial and pleural cavities lie above the diaphragm while the peritoneal cavity lies below the diaphragm. Diaphragm is mesodermal in origin, and the diaphragm is a composite structure that develops from the 4 embryonic components. These are the 4 embryonic components which I have already mentioned. It is septum transversum, pleuroperitoneal membrane, it is a paired one, you can see here, we have it on both the sides. Then we have dorsal mesentery of esophagus followed by mesoderm of the body wall. The septum transversum lies between pericardial and peritoneal cavities. Dorsal to it lies esophagus with its surrounding mesoderm and mesentery, that is the dorsal mesentery of the esophagus. Stop talking. On each side, dorsolateral to septum transversum, pleural and peritoneal cavities communicate with each other through a pleuroperitoneal canals. The liver develops in the caudal part of the septum transversum. The cranial part of septum transversum forms the central tendon of the diaphragm. Okay. I already mentioned your septum transversum is going to develop as a central tendon of the diaphragm. The pleuroperitoneal membranes develop and close the pleuroperitoneal canals. I see here. This is the extra membrane that is forming in your pleuroperitoneal canal that closes the pleuroperitoneal membrane which develops will close your pleuroperitoneal canals. Okay. They fuse with the dorsal mesentery of the esophagus and the septum transversum. The pleuroperitoneal membranes not only form a large portion of early fetal diaphragm, but it also represent only small portion of the diaphragm in the newborn babies. The dorsal mesentery of the diaphragm is invaded by the myoblast and forms the crura of the diaphragm. Any doubts? Any doubts in this? What are all the 4 important sources for the development of diaphragm? You can see the diagrams now. These are the same diagrams which I have explained. Just compare the structures and see it once. This is the developed or adult diaphragm structure, how we see in the adults. This part is going to turn as the central tendon. Okay. Okay. These are the embryonic structure and these are the adult derivatives. From the septum transversum, we have central tendon of the diaphragm. From the pleuroperitoneal membrane, we have small peripheral part developing in the developed diaphragm. Dorsal mesentery of esophagus will give rise to crura of the diaphragm. Mesoderm of the body wall is going to develop as a large peripheral part of the diaphragm external to parts derived from the pleuroperitoneal membranes. Okay. Next we have nerve supply of the diaphragm. At first the septum transversum lies in the cervical region opposite to 3rd, 4th and 5th cervical somites, and it is supplied by corresponding cervical spinal segments, that is C3, C4 and C5. Later the diaphragm descends caudally to its definitive position, that is the adult position, the thoraco-abdominal junction that is present opposite to your T7 to T12 spinal segments. The descent of diaphragm occurs due to the descent of diaphragm is a MCQ question, so note it down everyone. The descent of diaphragm occurs due to the elongation of neck, descent of heart and expansion of pleural cavities. When the diaphragm descends, it carries its nerve supply with it, hence the diaphragm is supplied by the phrenic nerve. In adults, it is supplied by the phrenic nerve. Foldings. This is the amniotic cavity and this is the yolk sac, and here we can see the intraembryonic mesoderm, here we have ectoderm and here we have endoderm, right. On either side, that is on the cranial end and in the caudal end, we have three important structures. What are those? Here it is cloacal membrane, connecting stalk, followed by allantois. Here we have buccopharyngeal membrane, then we have pericardial region, and this part is your septum transversum, right, later which is going to develop as a diaphragm. When the embryo is in this stage, this septum transversum, which is later going to develop, or part of diaphragm, is supplied by your C3, C4 and C5. And C5 spinal segment nerves, okay. Later when the foldings takes place, this septum transversum will descend into its original position or adult position. If you see here, the buccopharyngeal membrane is in the third position, but after the folding takes place, the first position is your buccopharyngeal membrane, followed by pericardial cavity, then followed by septum transversum. So this is the order. First we have primitive mouth, then followed by the development of heart, that is the pericardial region, followed by your septum transversum, okay. This is called descent of the diaphragm. This is your MCQ question. Definitely they will ask what are the reasons for the descent of the testis, okay. So during the embryo, or at the level of the embryo, it is supplied by C3, C4 and C5 spinal segment nerves, then it is going to descend by the craniocaudal folding. Once the folding takes place, first we have primitive mouth, that is buccopharyngeal membrane, followed by the developing heart, then we have the diaphragm. That process is called descent of the diaphragm. After the descent, it is supplied by the phrenic nerves, okay. Any doubts? Any doubts in this? Any doubts in the nerve supply? Okay. Next we have anomalies of the diaphragm. The very first condition is congenital diaphragmatic hernia. Yesterday only I asked the question, what is diaphragmatic hernia, right? While discussing about which topic? Distress, okay, fine. It is a herniation of abdominal contents into the pleural cavity through a large gap or defect present in the posterolateral part of the diaphragm, most commonly on the left side. This defect occurs due to defective development of pleuroperitoneal membrane or failure of fusion of the pleuroperitoneal membrane with other elements of the diaphragm. When the abdominal contents like intestine, stomach or spleen herniate in the thorax, they compress the developing lungs and cause their hypoplasia. Okay. So, what did you understood? Diaphragmatic hernia is a condition where you can see the contents of your abdominal cavity in the thoracic region. Okay. This occurs due to the failure of the development of pleuroperitoneal membrane or because of its fusion, failure of the fusion. Remember, your pleuroperitoneal membrane should fuse with your septum transversum and also with the dorsal mesentery of the esophagus for a proper development. If that does not occur, it will cause a herniation. Okay. This is the defect in the posterolateral part of the diaphragm. Here I mention one more point. This condition is most commonly found on the left side. Why? Take an assignment question. Why congenital diaphragmatic hernia is most commonly found on the left side? Okay. Why congenital diaphragmatic hernia is found commonly on the left side? It's an assignment question. Okay. This is the normal condition and this is the condition where the baby is affected by your diaphragmatic hernia. Okay. Any doubts? Any doubts in the herniation? You can see this is your small intestine which entered your thoracic cavity region. It shifts your heart also to the right side. You can observe. The next condition is congenital hiatus hernia. What do you mean by hiatus? Okay. It is a herniation of part of the fetal stomach through an exclusively large esophageal hiatus in the diaphragm through which esophagus and vagus nerve will pass. The congenital hiatus hernia is very uncommon. So, what did you understood? In which region the hernia is taking place? In the stomach part, that too in a fetus. Okay. This condition is uncommon, that means it can't be seen regularly. Fine. An exclusively large esophageal hiatus in the diaphragm through which your esophagus and nerve will pass is going to form the herniation in the stomach region. Okay. That's finish your development of diaphragm along with the clinical anatomy. Okay. That's it. Thank you.